Who raised you more, your parents, your grandparents, or someone else?
They told me they were taking Jason away for a few days because he had been really stressed and needed a reset, and I was supposed to understand that it was a family thing. I just happened not to fit into this time. Which is a sentence I have heard in some form since I was old enough to pour my own cereal, except this time there was a private island involved and a group chat without me. And the way my mother said we will catch up when we are back landed like a door clicking shut in a hallway that I pay to keep lit, and I felt something in me stop asking for a chair at a table that I built with them piece by piece over years of being the reliable one. You know how families have a default setting, like a script they run without even thinking, where one person is the hero even when they face plant and the other person is the helper even when they are carrying everyone's weight. And no one calls it favoritism because that would make it ugly. They call it tradition or personality or the way things are, and if you try to point to it, people act like you are bringing drama into a peaceful room. Well, that was us. And it always came back to the same simple math where Jason got the safety net and I was expected to be the safety net. So when the island trip showed up like a victory lap for the golden child, I had the kind of clarity you only get when someone stops pretending and just tells you the truth by accident. I am not going to paint you a picture because none of that matters here. What matters is the pattern, the very American, very normal pattern of a family that loves to say we are all we have while quietly choosing one person as the investment and one as the backup plan. And I am telling you this as plainly as I can because if you have ever sat through a birthday dinner where your gift to your brother was the fact that you used your emergency fund to keep his car from getting repossessed the week before and your mother toasted his resilience, you already understand everything you need to know about how we got to a for sale sign on the lawn. They did college for him like it was a team project and for me like it was a motivational poster. Lots of speeches about grit and independence and the value of paying your own way. And because I am good at being useful, I made it work. I took extra shifts. I learned to stretch bills like elastic, and when he needed a cosigner, I showed up because saying no would have been treated like a betrayal of family values, which is funny because those values never seemed to cost anyone else actual money. I am not listing grievances to make you feel sorry for me. I am showing you the ledger that was always in the red on my side, the quiet one that lives behind the framed photos. So when the island text came through, and I could see in the preview the kind of breezy tone people use when they know you will swallow a slight, because you always have, I did not cry, and I did not call a friend to vent. I sat down at my kitchen table and I took a breath like someone about to lift a heavy box, and I asked myself a question I should have asked years ago, which is simple and sharp. What happens if I stop playing the part they assigned me? Here is the thing no one tells you about family roles. They are contracts no one signs, but everyone enforces, and the moment you start reading the fine print and scratching out clauses you never agreed to, the room gets loud. So I decided to practice being loud without saying a word, and I started with something small enough to be undeniable and big enough to be felt, something clean, legal, and mine to do. A while back, during one of Jason's rough patches that we were all supposed to treat like the weather, his car insurance went through the roof because of a mistake he kept insisting was not his fault. And the family solution was to slide the policy under my umbrella to lower the premium because my record was spotless and my name made the numbers look better, which is another way of saying my responsibility was free money they could spend. And it sat there on autopay like a quiet tax I paid for. The privilege of being included when it was convenient. I had told myself I would switch it back when things calmed down, but things never calm down when people know they can hand you the bill. I opened the insurer's portal, the one I had been ignoring out of habit and avoidance, and I looked at the monthly draft that had been leaving my account like clockwork, and I thought about my mother saying we will catch up when we are back like I was a neighbor, not a daughter, and I felt a kind of steady heat that was not rage so much as focus, and I turned off the autopay, which felt like closing a leaking valve I had been too polite to mention. Then I called the agent and asked to remove my name as the primary on his policy because I am done carrying risk I do not create, and I scheduled the change to land mid-trip because I wanted the message to be clear even if I never said it out loud. Before you call that petty, let me explain the point, because this is not about making him scramble at a rental counter or about leaving him stranded. This is about walking back a line that should never have crossed into my bank account. About telling myself the truth that I have rights inside this family even if no one likes how they sound. And if Jason had called me that moment and said he needed help, I would have told him to put it back in his name like every adult I know does, and then I would have wished him a good trip, because consequences are not cruelty, they are boundaries with receipts. I did one more thing while I had the nerve, which was to take my face out of every account where I had been added as the reliable contact, the person companies call when a payment bounces or a form is missing, and I sent my mother a short, calm message that said I am simplifying my finances and taking my name off anything that is not mine, and I expected a quick thank you for all you have done, or at least a question. But what I got was silence, followed by a photo of my brother on a dock with a caption about how he finally looks relaxed, and I realized silence is how people keep a system running, because if they do not acknowledge the shift, they can pretend it did not happen. That night I slept hard for the first time in a long time, not because I had punished anyone, but because I had taken one small step that belonged to me and did not require permission. And in the morning I woke up with a steady idea humming in the back of my head, the kind that makes you sit up straighter and pull old folders out of a drawer, an idea about the house and the way our parents talk about legacy like it is a story they own, and I thought, if I can change a policy with a few clicks, what else can I change that actually has my name on it? And that is the moment this stopped being about a vacation and started being about the ground under our feet, because there was a line in our family paperwork no one paid attention to except me. And if I am right about what it means, then what I did with the insurance was just a warm-up. When they told me those exact words, that we will catch up when we are back, I realized it was not just about a vacation or a few days on some private island that was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime treat for my brother. It was about the message underneath. The one they have been sending me my entire life without ever spelling it out, which is that I am not really part of their version of family. I am just the reliable placeholder who will still be standing when the party ends, and for the first time I heard it as clearly as if they had written it in permanent marker on the kitchen wall. The island itself did not bother me. I am not someone who cares about cocktails by a pool or being waited on, but what I could not ignore was the smug tone in my mother's voice when she said it, as though she was rehearsing a line that made her sound innocent. And the way my father added that Jason needed this break after working so hard, like I had not been juggling 2 jobs to pay off student loans while they were co-signing his new condo, and the more I replayed it, the more I understood that it was not just a trip, it was a declaration of who mattered and who didn't, spoken out loud in a way they usually avoided. I sat at home that first night, scrolling through pictures of them boarding the boat, smiling with drinks in their hands, and what hit me hardest was not jealousy, but a strange kind of emptiness. The realization that if I disappeared for a week no one would notice unless a bill went unpaid, and I started to think about how many years I had been holding up my side of the bargain, sending birthday gifts even when mine were forgotten, stepping in when Jason messed something up so badly it should have followed him forever, letting my parents explain away the favoritism as love expressed differently, and how that bargain had bought me nothing but the role of dependable background character in their highlight reel. The next day I met up with a friend for coffee, someone who has seen pieces of this dynamic but never the whole picture, and when I told her what had happened she leaned back, shook her head, and said the thing I had never said out loud to myself. They don't even hide it anymore, do they? It's like you're just the safety net they keep in the closet until he falls again. That sentence landed like a hammer, because it was one thing to think I was exaggerating, but it was another thing to hear someone outside the family describe it with such blunt accuracy. And I realized I had been gaslit for so long into believing I was oversensitive when in reality, I had been trained to accept crumbs while they handed Jason the cake. By the 3rd day I had moved past the hurt and into something colder, a place I did not recognize in myself, where instead of crying or begging for a seat at their table, I started looking at everything differently. Like I was no longer standing on the outside of the glass pressing my face to see in, but I was inside the house, realizing the furniture belonged to me as much as anyone, and maybe more, because I had actually taken care of it while they were out pretending. I remember standing at the kitchen counter, opening the drawer where my father kept property tax receipts, and realizing that for years I had been the one sorting and paying those bills, not out of generosity, but because someone had to. And if you want to know what clarity feels like, it is the moment you understand you hold the keys and the others are too arrogant to see it. The truth is, that island trip was the breaking point not because I was excluded, but because it finally gave me permission to stop pretending, to stop trying to earn something that was never going to be handed to me. And once I allowed myself to stop begging for fairness, I felt this strange freedom I had never felt before. The freedom to stop keeping their secrets. The freedom to stop playing the role of unpaid accountant and loyal backup. And most importantly, the freedom to imagine what it might look like to win for once. When my friend asked me what I was going to do, I told her the truth, that I didn't know yet, but I was done sitting quietly, and whatever came next was not going to look like the old me. She laughed nervously, probably thinking I meant I would confront my parents at dinner, or maybe send an angry email, but what I meant, though I didn't say it then, was that I had just begun pulling a thread that would unravel every comfortable lie they had wrapped themselves in, because once you stop caring about being the good daughter, you become someone who can actually move pieces on the board. That night, while they were no doubt sipping wine and toasting Jason's brilliance on the beach, I sat with my laptop and started digging, not out of spite, but out of curiosity, because I had never looked too closely at the files, the accounts, the deeds, the things they always left lying around for me to organize, but now I wanted to see what was mine, what had my name on it, and what they had taken for granted I would never question. By the time I closed the computer, I knew two things. First, that I had more leverage than I had ever realized, and second, that my days of being the invisible sister were over, because if they could leave me behind so easily, I could just as easily move forward without them. And here is the part that should have scared me but didn't. I felt calm, almost relieved, because once you stop chasing their approval, you realize how much power you actually have when you stop playing by their script. I did not know exactly how it would all play out, but I knew that when they came home, their house, their legacy, and their comfortable little system would not look the same, and for the first time in my life, that thought made me smile. I did not march over there and make a scene or leave a voicemail I would regret, because I have done versions of that in the past, and all it ever got me was a lecture about tone followed by a pat on the head and a reminder that Jason is under a lot of pressure. So instead, I did something quieter and, honestly, braver for me, which was to treat myself like a person who is standing, and that started with pulling out the fat accordion folder I have been maintaining for years like an unpaid office manager, and finally reading every page as if it were about me, because it turns out most of it actually is. Buried under appliance warranties and a stack of contractor estimates, there was the packet from the year my parents refinanced after my father's surgery, a year when their credit was not great and their nerves were worse. And the mortgage guy had told them that adding me would make the numbers smile. So they slid a notarized paper across the table and said, "It is just estate planning. It makes things simpler if something happens. You will thank us one day." And I signed because that is what I did. Back then, I helped. I showed up. I made hard things easier, and I never thought to ask what it meant in plain terms. Now, sitting alone with a cup of coffee going cold, I read the sentence that no one ever bothered to read to me out loud. The one that said my name sits beside theirs on the title, not as a footnote or a courtesy, but as an owner with rights and responsibilities, and I felt that sentence change the air in the room. I am not pretending to be a lawyer, and I am not interested in playing internet attorney, so I did the next right thing and booked an hour with an actual real estate attorney. A woman a friend recommended who is allergic to drama and speaks in normal language, and I told her the truth without dressing it up, that my family had gone off to celebrate my brother and left me with the bills and the filing cabinet. That my name is on the deed, that property taxes have a habit of landing on my desk. First, because I am the one who remembers due dates, and that I am done operating like a volunteer. She listened without interrupting, asked for the instrument number on the recorded deed, pulled it up while we were on the call, and said the kind of sentence that makes your spine straighten, which was, "You have more authority than you think, and you do not need anyone's permission to protect an asset you already own." There are moments in your life when you recognize the exact hinge where the door swings, and this was one of them. Not because she gave me permission, but because she reminded me I already had it. So after we hung up, I called a local broker whose name I knew from a yard sign down the street. A woman with a calm voice and a reputation for getting things done without turning everything into a spectacle. And I said I want a preliminary title report. I want a real market analysis that is not a fantasy number someone throws out at a barbecue, and I want a sign company on standby, not for show, but because I am done treating this house like a museum where I am only allowed to dust. Before you think I set fire to everything out of spite, let me be clear about my math, because every decision I made was about fairness with a backbone. I have paid more than my share of things for that house over the years. From property tax installments when a due date was missed to a new water heater no one thanked me for. Not because I love being a martyr, but because I could not stand the idea of penalties and late fees when a phone call and a payment would fix it. And I had the money even if it meant my own vacation turned into a staycation. So I gathered the receipts into a tidy stack that could make sense to a stranger, told the broker I wanted every reimbursement and advance documented, and asked her to connect me with a title officer who could confirm the obligations attached to the property and the notices that had been quietly accumulating while everyone was posting photos from the dock. The broker came by the next morning with a printout and a pen and a look that said she had seen this movie before. Not The Island or The Golden Child, but the family who thought paperwork was a suggestion until it wasn't, and we walked through the ordinary, boring truths that run the world, like the way unpaid property taxes do not care about anyone's feelings, and the way a recorded deed means what it says, and the way an owner who is actually paying attention can take steps to protect the value of an asset that everyone else treats like a trophy. She asked me whether I wanted to proceed with a coming soon listing or keep everything quiet until I said the word, and I told her I wanted quiet power, not noise, so we would order the title, run the comps, draft the paperwork, and schedule the post and sign to be installed on a date I would choose later, with the order prepaid and the installer instructed not to take calls from anyone but me. While those grown-up wheels started turning, I handled the smaller but necessary cleanups that send a message without shouting, the kinds of moves that look petty only if you have never been the person politely footing the bill. So I closed the shared warehouse unit that was in my name because I had signed for it during Jason's last great pivot and never got around to taking myself off. I ended the household shopping memberships that I was financing because allegedly the points help everyone, but somehow never helped me, and I pulled my card from the family emergency account that had turned into a bottomless brunch for other people's chaos. And with every cancellation, I felt a little less like furniture and a little more like a person who makes decisions. I know some people will say I should have called them first, that a better daughter would have aired grievances around a table and begged for fairness one more time, but I am done auditioning for decency in a theater where the casting is rigged, and besides, the phone works both ways, and if they can send a photo from a boat with a caption about how relaxed he finally looks, they can also handle a few texts from banks asking who is the authorized party now that the responsible one has stepped back. By the time the sun went down, I had a folder with the title officer's initial findings, a signed agreement that gave the broker authority to do the groundwork and nothing more until I said so, and a scheduled installation ticket for a signpost and panel with a simple instruction in the notes field that made me breathe in deeply and exhale something old, which was, install on my confirmed day, no substitutions, no confirmations to any other number. And if anyone asks, refer them to me as co-owner. I closed the laptop and felt the quiet, clean satisfaction of an action that cannot be argued away by tone policing or guilt, because it is written, paid for, and cued. And since every step needs a punctuation mark to tell your past self that you are not going backward, I ended the night with one small piece of revenge that felt like flipping the breaker back to my own side of the house, which was to rename the family group thread they had excluded me from. Someone had added me back without comment when the insurance notice hit, to a title that made me laugh in spite of everything, a simple line that said, "We will catch up when we are back." And then I dropped a calm message that read, "I went ahead and took my name off what is not mine and moved forward on what is." I will fill you in when you return, because I wanted the words they used to settle over them the way they have settled over me for years. I put my phone face down, and for the first time in a long time, I did not dread the moment it buzzed. The thing about making a decision that changes the balance of power is that once you take the first step, you realize how many doors have been open the whole time and how often you chose not to walk through them because you were afraid of being called ungrateful or difficult. And in that quiet week while they were gone, while they were drinking cocktails and pretending they had earned a break from the stress of Jason's latest failed business scheme, I started noticing just how many details in this house and in our family's finances had my fingerprints on them, not because I was ever thanked or acknowledged, but because someone had to do the work, and they were always too busy treating him like a prince to handle the boring realities of bills, deadlines, and contracts. I dug deeper into the files, not out of spite, but out of something that felt almost like archaeology, as if I were uncovering a record of who had really carried this family for the past decade, and with every receipt, every email confirmation, every bank statement where my deposits had covered a shortfall, I could see the outline of the truth they had buried under years of speeches about how Jason deserved patience because he was still finding himself, while I was supposed to be proud of being independent. The truth was simple and sharp. My name was not just on the deed. My money had kept this house from sliding into foreclosure more than once. My discipline had kept the county off our backs when property taxes were overdue. And my signature had been the one that saved them from penalties they never even knew were about to hit. What I realized in those long hours at the kitchen table was that I had more than leverage. I had a documented history of ownership in everything but name, and now, ironically, the name was there too. Carved into the deed because years ago they needed my credit to look clean, and they thought I would never notice the difference between being useful and being powerful. I smiled at that realization, not out of cruelty, but because it felt like the world had finally admitted something I had known in my gut all along. I was not a guest in this family. I was the engine, and engines do not need permission to run. The broker, who by now had become an unlikely ally, called me back with the title report and the market comps, and when she walked me through the numbers, her voice was calm but firm, the way someone talks when they have seen this story play out in a dozen other families. And she told me point blank that if the property went on the market in the current climate, it would not only sell, but it would sell fast, and the proceeds, after clearing the back taxes and obligations, would be split according to ownership, which meant I was not waiting on handouts anymore. I was holding a stake that was real, negotiable, and valuable. It was strange to feel both furious and liberated at the same time. Furious that they had hidden behind tradition, and guilt to keep me quiet while they let Jason stumble through life cushioned by excuses. And liberated because I finally saw that all their excuses only worked as long as I kept pretending to buy them. Once I put my signature to paper that carried legal weight instead of emotional weight, their whole system started to wobble like a table with one leg cut short. I spent the next 2 days making moves that looked ordinary on the surface, but were tectonic underneath. I called the utility companies and had accounts redirected so that notices would no longer come to me first. I scheduled a quiet consultation with a tax preparer who confirmed what I already suspected: that my contributions over the years were traceable and provable, which meant I had standing to demand reimbursement if I chose to push it, and I even drafted a plain but unmistakable letter addressed to my parents and to Jason, outlining the payments I had made, the receipts I had saved, and the rights I held as co-owner. I did not send it yet. I kept it in a folder, waiting like a loaded chamber, because sometimes the most powerful thing is knowing you could pull the trigger, but choosing your timing. What surprised me most in those days was how calm I felt, because if you had told me a year ago that I would be plotting real estate moves behind my family's back, I would have laughed and said I do not have it in me. But sitting there with the numbers spread out and the documents in order, I felt steadier than I ever had, and it struck me that maybe the reason I always felt small around them was not because I was weak, but because I was always playing the game by their rules. Change the rules, change the feeling. By the fourth night, I had everything lined up, the paperwork drafted, the sign order on standby, the letter that would shatter their illusion tucked safely away, and a tax advisor who told me I had been subsidizing their lives in ways I could not even fully calculate. All that was left was the timing, and the timing was almost poetic because their return flight was scheduled for Sunday afternoon, and the installer was ready to place the for sale sign in the lawn on Sunday morning if I gave the word. I walked through the empty house, every room filled with echoes of arguments where I had been told to stop being dramatic or to stop keeping score, and I realized that keeping score was exactly what had saved me, because without my receipts, without my records, without my habit of doing the boring hard work, I would have nothing but wounded feelings, and wounded feelings never change anything. But I had proof, and proof is power, and power in the hands of someone who has been overlooked too long is not just satisfying, it is unstoppable. When I finally sat down that evening, glass of water in hand and my phone buzzing with another photo from the island, this time Jason posing with some new friend he had made, captioned with a smug little line about how family always comes through for each other, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was such a perfect example of the story they tell themselves, and I knew that in less than 24 hours that story would collide head-on with the reality waiting for them at the curb. And the best part, the part that still makes me breathe deeper, is that I did not have to scream, I did not have to beg, and I did not have to explain. All I had to do was let the paperwork, the sign, and the silence speak for me. Because when they came back, it was not going to be about whether they thought I was dramatic, or jealous, or ungrateful. It was going to be about the one fact they could not talk their way around. The ground beneath them had already shifted, and I was the one who moved it. They pulled into the driveway in that familiar, noisy way that always announced them before the door opened, voices overlapping with the upbeat rhythm people use when they want the story to be one thing and nothing else. And I watched from the front room as the rental rolled to a stop, and the first expression on my mother's face shifted from relaxed to puzzled to something tight and brittle, because the sign on the lawn was not a prank or a misunderstanding or a neighbor's mistake. It was a clean whiteboard with a broker's name and a phone number and a simple message that had nothing to do with feelings or pecking orders and everything to do with the one fact they never expected to face, which is that I am not a guest here, and I do not ask for permission to protect what I own. They stood there in a loose cluster, suitcases half out of the trunk, and that brittle laughter bubbling up the way it does when people hope they can laugh a problem out of existence. And Jason turned to me with the same expression he wore as a teenager when a teacher finally called home, and he asked what is this supposed to mean, as if I had left a sarcastic sticky note on the fridge. While my father moved straight to the lecture he had been sharpening for years about family loyalty and private matters and how certain things are not done, and my mother, shifting into the role of mediator she reserves for moments when appearances are at risk, said that she wished I had talked to them first, that we could have worked something out. And I let them speak because I have learned that people cling hardest to the script in the moment before it falls apart. When they paused for the answer they assumed would be some combination of apology and explanation, I handed my father a thin folder and told him that inside he would find a copy of the recorded deed with my name placed exactly where they had put it when they needed my credit, a ledger of the property taxes I had paid over the years with dates and confirmation numbers that never made it into their speeches about fairness, a summary from the title officer noting 2 small notices they had missed. That would have turned expensive if I had not handled them quietly, and a letter from the attorney laying out the reality that a co-owner has every right to initiate a sale or, if blocked, to file for partition, which is a dry legal word that sounds like furniture assembly until you realize it means a judge will force a sale when adults cannot act like adults. Jason tried to talk over it, waving the folder in the air as if waving could change the words, and he said we could settle this like family if I would just calm down and stop making a scene, and I told him that a scene is a thing you make when you shout, while a boundary is a thing you make when you sign, and that this was not about punishment or spectacle. It was about math and respect and the simple conditions that govern every adult world I have ever been expected to function in without complaint, and that if he wanted to settle it like family, he could start by reading the part where my contributions are totaled and my buyout number is circled in plain ink, a number built from appraised value minus obligations, not inflated. Not a ransom, just a professional figure to end a very long and lopsided tab. My father said I was being dramatic and that I had blindsided them, and I told him I was done with the word dramatic unless he was finally ready to apply it to years of expecting me to serve as cosigner, project manager, accountant, and emergency fund whenever his son needed a soft landing, and that if he wanted to talk about blindsiding, he could explain why I learned about the island trip from a group text that forgot I exist, because if they can make big moves without me, then they can live with me making one that protects my position and does not require a permission slip from the family committee that never convenes until I step out of line. They asked me what exactly I planned to do, and I told them I had already done the responsible parts and cued the decisive parts, that a preliminary listing agreement with a reputable broker had been signed to allow preparation but not marketing, that a title report was complete and a file had been opened with escrow purely to gather and confirm obligations, that the sign was paid for and would remain until we had either closed a sale or executed a clean buyout, and that the attorney had drafted a partition petition which would be filed the morning after the deadline if there was no movement, not because I enjoy courtrooms, but because I am tired of systems that only move when I push. My mother started to cry in that way that used to make me back down, and she asked if we could at least take the sign down while we talked as a family, and I told her I love her and that I am not moving the goalposts anymore. That the sign is not a threat or a humiliation. It is a timer that tells all of us that the era of me quietly swallowing expenses has ended, and that if they want to keep the house, they can prove it by buying me out before the date in the letter, with certified funds and acknowledgments from both of them that the days of my credit and my bank account doing the heavy lifting are over. I said it calmly, because it was not a tantrum, it was a policy change. And policy changes do not get negotiated down just because someone is uncomfortable. Jason asked where he was supposed to get that kind of money, and I told him with the same patience I have used for years that he could call the same friends and investors he always calls when he has a new idea, or he could sell the condo my parents helped him buy, or he could learn the lesson the rest of us learned in early adulthood about living within limits, and if those options felt insulting, then perhaps he could step inside for a minute and read the ledger of the payments I had made on his behalf when insult should have been what I felt and responsibility is what I chose instead, because if I could find money to keep our roof safe while working 2 jobs and eating the judgment that came with it, then he could surely find a path to respect me now that I was not offering mine for free. My father, who had been quiet longer than I expected, finally asked what would happen if they agreed to the buyout, and I told him the honest answer, which is that I would sign a release, remove the listing, instruct the broker to stand down, close escrow with a simple disbursement for reimbursement and equity, and walk away from the house with my dignity intact and my future not tied to a perpetual emergency role, and that I would also remove the memorandum my attorney recorded against the property that prevents any new loans or transfers without my consent, because while I do not want to choke anyone's options, I will not leave the door open for another round of secret refinancing that lands on my desk when the music stops. They stood there in a silence that finally felt like listening instead of stalling, and I watched the moment it clicked that I was not bluffing and not enraged and not manipulable, just done, and in that moment a neighbor drove by slowly, eyes lingering on the sign the way neighbors do when a story is changing on their street, and for once I did not feel embarrassed or guilty or like I had to smooth things over. I felt steady, and I told them I would be inside at the kitchen table with the broker on speaker, waiting for one of 2 phone calls, either a call to schedule the appraisal for the buyout or a call to confirm the first weekend of showings. And that either way I wished them a good evening and a calm conversation with each other about what growing up was going to look like in this family from now on. I walked back inside without slamming a door or tossing a final insult, because I did not need theatrics to make the point that the power dynamic had changed. I simply sat down in the chair where I have paid bills and saved this house more times than anyone will ever admit. And I looked at the folder that proved it, and I called the broker to say we were either moving forward or cashing out, and when my phone buzzed a minute later with a text from my father asking if we could talk tonight as a family, I replied yes, we can talk when the certified check is in my hand or when you sign the showing agreement, because I am done talking without terms. And if that sounds cold, then remember that cold is how they left me when they said we will catch up when we are back. And that is the part one want you to hear clearly, because it is the whole point of this long, messy, necessary story. I did not burn their house down or smash their piece for sport. I simply refuse to keep pretending that love means paying invoices while someone else cashes the applause, and I use the tools adults use when they are serious, and I won, not because I hurt them, but because I ended the contract none of us signed, but all of us enforced. So when people ask me whether I went too far, I tell them the truth, that the sign on the lawn was not revenge, it was a mirror, and they did not like the reflection, and when they finally chose to buy me out at a fair number a week later, the relief on my mother's face told me everything I needed to know. Which is that boundaries do not destroy families, they rescue the people who have been holding them together for too long, and even if the group chat never says it out loud, they will never again tell me to wait until they are back. Because from now on they will be the ones catching up.